All right, I think we're live. Okay, fantastic. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me in this session this Sunday. Hope everyone is doing well and you're safe and healthy. And I just want to say, as I do every Sunday now, I am just so honored to be here with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things we want to do today, I'm in Northern California here in the middle of like the wildfires and everything. The smoke is a little bit better today, so I hopefully will not have to put on a mask. Hopefully we'll be okay with that today. And thank you also everyone for all of your emails and messages of support over this period. So the things we want to do today together in our shared sacred spaces. Number one, I'll set sacred space. Number two, we'll have our overall topic for this week, which is going to be just a topic that is near and dear to my heart: the power of story in manifestation, in the unfolding of your life, kind of in real time as you go through. And we'll have Gary here with us, my editor in Bangalore, to help sort of tell that story and give the sort of meta story context around it as well. We'll do a little bit of an exercise around story at the end of that, and then that's it. That'll be it. We'll close the sacred space session after that. So now we'll just dive in, and I will go ahead and set sacred space. So what we'd like to do here together is to create a space devoid of fear, threat, and control, so that we will be able to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we choose to define that. A safe sanctuary space for all of us to relax and surrender with no danger or threat, so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will now propose that we all follow the principles while we're in sacred space, the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. The first is confidentiality. What is said in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now we're in an online, we're not in person. We're in an online kind of venue here. And the video replay, everything, it's free and open to the public. So the way we will do confidentiality in this context is through basic anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous as you participate, you don't have to be, but if you would like to be, you would come into the Crowdcast kind of feed, and then go into your profile, edit profile feature on Crowdcast, and then just change your shown username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever, and then come back and participate from there. Okay, so that's the first principle. The second principle is that there is no threat, no controlling, no fear mongering, no fear sort of poking at the other person, no fixing, no tough love, right? There's so overall feeling of no interference, no intervention with each other. Because the point is, in sacred space, our goal is to hold space for each other, to be afraid, to be anxious, to be a mess, to be all put together, to be a mess and in denial and act like we're all put together. And that's okay. We just leave everyone as they are. We leave them to be happy, to be relaxed. And however we show up, we are all kind of agreeing while we're in sacred space to basically be okay with that and to hold space for that. And the idea here is that in making the distinction between sacred and profane, we're not saying profane is bad, right? Profane is just profane. And there are certain things that happen in the realm of the profane that are appropriate to the profane. And there are certain things that you can only do in the sacred that are appropriate to the sacred. And in our modern kind of world, it's kind of like 99%, profane and 1% sacred typically. and we carve out space and we create sacred space, basically so we can sit in sacred space, relax a bit, and then where appropriate, let the things happen in sacred space that are appropriate to sacred space, and often can only happen when you're in sacred space. So we're not saying intervening is bad. We're not saying tough love, healing, fixing is bad, curing is bad. We're not saying any of that. But because those are all of the provenance of kind of the world of fear, control, and threat, right? Take this medicine, it's good for you, or else, right? Fear, control, and threat. I need to do this to you. Believe me, it's going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Fear, control, and threat. Okay. And that's fine. That's more of the realm of the profane. And in the sacred, that's just not how the physics work. So we set all that aside for the hour or two we're together here in sacred space, so that we can partake of the nourishment of not having that and of the other fruits that bear in sacred space. The third principle is a corollary, which is that there is no commerce in sacred space. Nothing may be sold or recommended or even suggested, regardless of whether there's a price or if it's free. I can't sell you anything. Nobody is, basically allowed to sell anything to anyone here, because we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. In other words, we are here for the power that you are, the presence and attention that you are, not for what you do or provide, right? So no commerce, no recommendations. And then the fourth is another corollary, that there's no expectation of participation. There's no pressure to do anything. You don't have to comment or not comment. You don't have to post a question or not post a question. You don't even have to stick around. You can come and go as you please. And all of us holding the sacred space together will tend to sort of protect that space for you to be here when you want to come back and you're ready to come back, or to be here and you don't come back. And that's totally okay, right? That potentiality where you have the freedom to come and go as you please, without any pressure, with no expectation of participation. In other words, even as you come and go with no feeling of fear, threat, or control, that itself is a form of nourishment, right? So there's no pressure to do anything. The nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us here together will tend to amplify that. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with it, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control to get you to stay in sacred space either, right? But if you are not okay with it, this is kind of the time to make that choice. And we will take a pause now and give everyone a moment to make their selection, and then those who wish to withdraw from the group now can do so. Again, with no fear, control, and threat. And we'll still catch up with you later in profane space, and we'll still hang out. All right, no worries at all. So I'll give you all a moment to dial that in. Okay. All right. So for now, for the rest of us, we will move forward together into sacred space. And as we enter into sacred space, I will just remind you that we are now in observance of the four principles: confidentiality, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, no expectation of participation. Welcome to sacred space. Happy Sunday. All right. So this week, the topic is, let me just take a quick peek at Facebook, make sure we're still running. We are not running. Okay. Okay. Now we're running. I apologize for that. The click somehow didn't go through. So the overall topic I want to cover this week is called the power of story in manifestation. So in this session, what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of exploration into the physics and dynamics of how stories introduce themselves into our lives and even strongly assert themselves into our lives with almost a sense of intelligence and will, right, and intention. in order to attempt, as we kind of look at it from the 30,000 foot level, attempt to give us support and directional guidance. Typically, when we are in the middle of like a reflection kind of period, a reflective period of our time, of our lives, a transformative period of our lives, and even periods of our lives where we are like, we feel we are in flow and we are in active manifestation, creating the world around us and like driving forward. And in each one of these points, stories will tend to come into our lives in various forms. They will come to us in dreams. They will come to us in childhood memories and episodes, which we have storied and put a narrative around, that will come back into our lives, and we may reform the narrative as we transform our lives, right? They may come in stories that we hear about, little sort of episodes of life in work, in personal, in office, in the workplace, in family, that we hear about, that we observe, but may not be actively kind of involved in. But we are able to observe and intake the story. The story pattern has still injected itself into the narrative of our lives somehow. And obviously media, movies, TV shows, books, games, right, that we play will introduce story snippets and story arcs, and different puzzle pieces of archetype, which is what story is, right, into our lives. They will present themselves to kind of guide our process, guide our circumambulation through life, guide our processes of healing, of transformation, of bliss and exploring our bliss, and then manifesting all of that sort of at a high level. Okay. So story is powerful and important. And we want to explore in this session then a little bit about the physics of how story can come into our lives, so that when you see these patterns, you can catch story coming in and out of your life a little bit better and take more nourishment from that, right? And so to do this week, I want to use the story of how an obscure kind of South Indian folktale presented itself to Gowrie, and then through Gowrie to me as well recently, just in the last month or so, and how this kind of mini episode proceeded to unfold and give guidance to her and to me, right? And then now actually the story bursting out of the two of us into live sacred space, where it will, sort of inject itself into, the lives of all of us now. And by doing this, I want to try to give a little bit of insight into the nature of story itself and the sort of kinetic dynamics of story. Okay. And the story here is, the story of the story is that a few weeks ago, so Gowrie is my editor for All of Preside. She's based in Bangalore. I'm based in San Francisco, here in California. And every week we're on the phone several times, brainstorming, kicking stuff around, working on our projects. And several weeks ago, we were on our call talking about the artist archetype and the nature of art and the nature of story. This is like right after we did those sacred space sessions on archetype and story. And in the middle of our call, this story came to her. It's the nature of, how, Gowrie and myself and people like us work, where we'll be on a call, we won't really have an agenda. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Gowrie will be like, a story just came to me. And I'm like, okay, give it to me, right? Tell me. And she told it. And this is a story that it ended quite abruptly, right? And we were both like, that was like, what did that even mean? We didn't get that. And I was like, so how is that story relevant to anything we're talking about? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, right. So, and that's a little bit of, kind of just insight on how we work too. Something comes to us, it makes no sense immediately, right away. But we just go ahead and hold space for it anyway. Over the next couple weeks, we would come back to the story every now and then. And its meaning and significance tended to develop further over time. And what we realized as this was happening is that, this kind of pattern happens all the time, right? In our work, in our lives, in the lives of all the people around us. So we wanted to then tell it and the story to all of you as an example of when a story will inject itself into your process and life. And even if you don't get it, if you don't stuff it down, as most of us do, right, it will tend to develop and have an intelligence. It will demonstrate a kind of intelligence and will of its own in its attempt to move you forward. Okay. And so what I want to do is I want to invite Gary on screen. Gary, can you come on screen? I'm not going to touch the controls. I'm going to mess something up. There you are.
Hi, Artie.
Hey, Gary, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Good, thank you.
Yay. All right. So I hope I introed that, okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to sort of then bring you on and say, Gary, can you tell us a bit about how this story came to you? And then maybe, if you feel so moved to actually tell the story for us, and then we can kind of dive into it from there.
Yeah, so, like you said, I was on the call with you and I said, I have a story. And at that time, I was still very hesitant to share it because I had absolutely no clue what that story even meant and why I wanted to share it. And it happened like just the previous day. I remembered the story out of the blue. So out of the blue, I don't even remember where and when I had, become acquainted with the story. I don't remember if somebody told me or I read this somewhere. I have no idea. So I just suddenly remembered it. And I thought, yeah, I mean, that's a funny story. And I think it's a folk tale, but I'm not sure where it's from. So I had to do a lot of searching, Google search and all of that. So to kind of figure out what story I was thinking of. And because it was so obscure, and when it came to me like that, I paid attention. I mean, I'm sure I remember so many stories all through the week, but normally I don't pay attention because it's like, yeah, I mean, that was a good story or that was a good movie. You just tend to kind of dismiss it that way. And I didn't do that this time. I was thinking, why this story? Why did it come to me like this when I don't even remember how I know this story? Right.
So it's interesting. So the obscurity, randomness of the story itself made you stop and go, what the heck?
Yes. Why did I remember the story? No, because it's from a folktale tradition from where I grew up. So Karnataka is the state I live in. Bangalore is its capital city, but the story itself is from a northern region of the state. And I grew up there when I was a child. So I'm not sure if I heard somebody telling the story or if I read it because, the folklore tradition there is quite strong. But it's still not a very well-known story. And I think it's because it's kind of so open-ended. It doesn't have a conclusion. It doesn't have a message. At least it doesn't have an obvious message. So I think that's why it's not one of the more popular stories. So I kind of got into finding out where I can get the story and if my memory of that story is accurate or in written form it's different. And I found the English translation of that by a well-known folklorist and translator, A.K. Ramanujan. And he has a whole collection of short stories from India, and he's translated them into English. I read that and I was like, oh yeah, that's the story. It's not too much. It's a very short, pithy story. So there's not much to forget, right? It's just, so then I, went into the source, the original, found the original in Kannada. That's the language I speak. And, there's a whole kind of rumination that happened around it. And when I shared it with you, I was half hoping that you will just read its symbolism and just tell me, oh yeah, so this is a nice story and I think this is what it means. But you were like, huh, what's that about?
Yeah, I had no clue.
Okay, this is a live project. We've got to work on this. So that's how it came, and and like I said, the obscurity is what made me pay attention, because why on earth would I remember something like this so randomly? So that's the thing. Would you like me to tell the story?
I'd love to hear it.
Because I think I've kind of built up a whole thing about it.
Let's do it.
Okay. So the story itself is, like I said, very short and pithy, and there's not much events or anything happening. So it's about a woman who had a story and a song within her. And she never shared it with anyone else. She didn't tell the story to anyone. And she didn't sing the song. And they were just stuffed within her without an outlet. And the story and the song felt quite suffocated inside. And they were thinking of, how do we escape? How do we run away? Because we can't just be choked like this anymore. And they were thinking of a plot. And one day, the woman was sleeping in the afternoon. She was having a siesta. And she had her mouth open for a while. And that's when the story and song decided to just escape out of her. They just tumbled out of her mouth from inside her. So the story came first and tumbled out, went towards the door, and turned into a pair of shoes and sat near the door. And then the song came after next, turned into a man's coat, and went and hung itself on the peg near the door. So, and all this while the woman was sleeping. And the evening, her husband came back home from work. And when he was entering, he saw the pair of shoes and the coat hanging on the wall. And he was surprised because he didn't recognize them. So he thought, oh, maybe we have a visitor. Maybe we have a guest. And he went in, but there was nobody except his wife. So the first thing is he asks her, who's the guest? Do we have a visitor? And the wife knows nothing about this. So she's like, who's that? I don't know. And he says, but I saw a pair of shoes outside and there's a coat hanging on the peg. Who does that belong to? And she says, I have no idea. And, instantly the man becomes suspicious. What is she hiding from me? This doesn't make sense. There's no explanation to this. And she's not telling me. She's supposed to know. She's been in the house all day long. So then, the more he becomes suspicious, the more frustrated he gets. And, the exchange gets heated. And she gets more and more confused. So at the end, they fight. They have a quarrel. And, they both get upset. The man then picks up his blanket and walks out in a huff. He decides he's not going to sleep inside the house. And he goes straight to the temple. And, temples usually have large courtyards and large veranda-like places for pilgrims and, travelers to sleep. So he just goes to the temple and he sleeps there. And it so happens that at night, when everyone's gone to sleep, all the flames from lamps in all the houses in the village, after they've been put out in the houses, they come straight to the temple, they gather around there, and all those flames kind of, gossip about what happened during the day, news from their respective households, and things like that. So all the flames were there except for one. And they waited, and finally this last flame arrived. And everyone asked, why are you late? And this flame said, well, the couple in my house, they fought. And the lady was upset, so she took a while before she fell asleep. And, she put me out quite late, so I couldn't leave. So then all the other flames were interested. Why did they fight? And the flame then said, well, the woman in my house had a story and a song which she refused to share with anyone. And then today, when she was asleep in the afternoon, the story and song escaped out of her, turned into a pair of shoes and a coat, and waited at the door. And when the man came, he saw that and became suspicious. But then, the woman didn't know what had happened. So then they ended up fighting. So, but the story in the song, the woman doesn't even know how this happened or what happened. So she's clueless. She's upset. And all this while this exchange was going on, the man was sleeping there. And he heard the whole story. And now everything was clear to him. And he felt sorry that, he had that fight. So he got up and went back home. And, by the time all this happened, it was already, the night had passed and it was daybreak. So he went back home, and the first thing is he saw his wife and he said, yeah, I know everything now. So what is that story and song? So he's curious. He wants to know what this is about, because that is something that the flame hasn't shared. And when the event of how this happened and what happened was all there, but what is the story in the song? So he's now bursting with curiosity. Goes and asks her, what is the story and song? She looks at him, equally puzzled, just like the previous day. She says, what story? What song? She doesn't remember. So that's the story.
That's
now
it.
That's it. That's the story. It's just so open-ended. You can, do whatever you like with it.
So I think everyone who's watching is basically probably like, what the hell? What kind of horrible non-Hollywood story is that? You're going to leave us hanging and not even make us pay for a sequel. There is no sequel.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the reaction we had. I'm like, on my walk, you're on your walk. You tell me that story and I'm like,
that's it.
Oh, what the heck? What do we do with that?
Yeah.
And you said, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, whatever, it's fine.
It took us about 2 or 3 weeks of unraveling to work on it. Yeah.
So how would you like to start? Would you like me to start and then you chime in, or how do you want to do it? Or do you want to?
I would love to hear what you think about the whole process of the story and song kind of, coming out of a person.
Okay. So, so the first thing I'll say is, for those of you who are maybe new to Sacred Space, new to, my work, new to us, the way I read a story or myth or dream is that, I'm just in brainstorm mode. I don't give any authoritative, readings or any of that. But the general kind of principle is that, I tend to take, when I hear a story, I tend to regard each major actor in the story as a symbol, as an avatar, representative of a different part of your own inner self, right? So in this story, the wife is a part of you, the husband is a part of you, the flames are a part of you, the temple is definitely a part of you, and the shoes and the coat, the story and the song, are absolutely a part of you, right? And so for those of you who have done my healing stuff, these are all board members, right? These are all board members. But you can just regard them as different parts of you. And this whole idea of well, I thought it was just me. What do you mean different parts of me? You can kind of work with that idea of multiplicity of mind, that you have many sort of different voices within you, without needing to get too fancy or spiritual, by simply saying, well, after dessert, after dinner, when you're thinking about what you want to have for dessert, you'll sometimes say, well, on the one hand, I want ice cream, and on the other hand, I want cake. And those are two distinct voices. They're both within you, and they don't initially disagree, but they eventually, if you work to reconcile them and coordinate them, well, maybe I'll have both. Maybe I'll have one today and one tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
If you take the time to hold space for them and coordinate, then you get to this sort of larger third, right? Sort of option, typically. So, so that's kind of how I approach story, how we approach story in general. So for me, I'll just sort of start anywhere. That the most kind of stunning thing for me when you first told me the story is that, the woman, which is, I take as a symbol of our own inner feminine. And those of you who have been following Sacred Space know that we've talked at length about the power of the inner feminine and the power of the inner masculine. And so the inner feminine, who is typically the holder of vision, right, has story and song within her, which are the vehicles of vision. And she is not sharing them. Right? She's stuffing them down to the point where she doesn't even know what the story and song are. Right now, why is this? Is it because it's a patriarchy and she doesn't feel safe? Is it because she hasn't developed the power of her voice? If so, why is that? Right? Because story and song both come from power of voice. From the chakra talk from last week, chakra 5, Vishuddha, the power of voice, stuck within her. Which is why when they escape out of her mouth. Right? They don't escape from her chest. They don't escape from, her like solar plexus. They escape from, it's like on an airplane, like the nearest exit to where you're seating, and they're seated here, right? And so right off the bat, to me, this is this idea, this single thread that I saw in the story, and I just started kind of pulling on it, right? Not knowing where I would go with it. I was like, well, she has a story, and it's a she, and the story is suppressed. And so when she's asleep, the story and song escape out of her. They tumble out of her mouth, not as a vengeance, not as a whatever. They just come out, and they have to take form in the outer world. And in this case, they take the form of shoes and coat, which has its own symbolism that we can kind of maybe talk about later. But basically, they physicalize, they reify, they come into like physical form in the world, right? So you have a story within you, and then you start doing your bliss, and you start writing poems or making movies or sort of teaching sessions and helping people. But the vision within you takes concrete form that then interacts in the world, and then if it's your bliss, it will typically rain down blessings on the life of the world around you. And so because it comes out in an uncoordinated way, right, and the open-ended aspects of all the story are where all of this sort of juiciness happens. It's almost like the story has all these gaps where the story itself is like holding space for us. To sort of do our own reflection and receive our own download, right? So the first question obviously is like, why is the inner feminine not sharing her story? Is it selfishness? Is it fear? Is it suppression? Is it, it's the feminine, so it's like a loaded kind of image, right? The second is they come out, and the immediate physics is the minute they come out and become concrete in an uncoordinated, unintentional manner, at least from her standpoint, it causes discord and disruption. The man and the woman fight. So the inner masculine and inner feminine are like, what do we do with this thing? Where did this come from? She's like, I don't know where it came from. Blah, blah, blah. Right. And then I'll just thumbnail out because I want you to start filling in as well. But I'll just give a very quick broad brush stroke. He leaves. He goes to the temple. And the temple is its own kind of symbol, which you had something to say about it. I'll leave that to you to sort of share.
Mm-hmm.
But in the temple, what was super sort of interesting to me was that because of this discord, the scene of the action moves from the house, which is the bedroom, the inner sanctum of the self, where inner masculine and inner feminine are integrated and harmonized, right? Moves from the bedroom to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that you find in the temple is Agni, flame, right? Flame. And so, again, leaning hard on the 7 chakras talk from last week, Agni is the element of the 3rd chakra, Manipura, which is the chakra of will to power.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's flame, it's fire, but it's also light, which is the element of not Agni, but Agya.
Yeah.
Agya. And I was like, interrogating you last week about like, what is the etymological kind of connection between those two, which we won't get into, right? But, there's this connection between the flame of fire, the heat, which is the power, right? And the illumination of fire, the light of which is intelligence and insight, right? So flame combines both. And in the temple, the inner masculine here gets illumination, gets jnana, agya, illumination and seeing from the power of the flame.
Yeah.
And which is brilliant to me, because in this story about a story escaping, intelligence also tells its story. Insight, illumination tells its story.
Yeah.
There's a sub-story here about flames literally lighting, right?
Yeah.
The
Throwing
whole
light.
situation. Yeah. Illuminating, the story is illuminating itself, the situation of itself.
Yeah.
And the illumination comes from the mix of will and insight and divine. So the will is almost like inner masculine. He like charges out of the house. He's like, what the hell? And you're like, whoa, you need to be careful when a man's blood is up, right? And just leave him alone. And he goes to the temple, and then that leads to his illumination.
Yeah.
Which I just loved. And I just love this. I just love this idea of all the flames gathering in the temple after night. That was just that alone was like unbelievable. That the idea of like the insight, the light, the willpower, the illumination, the intelligence, the intuition. When we put it out when we sleep, it doesn't go away. They gather and confer and gossip on their own. Like off duty out in the back, like taking a smoke break, which very much says that they are independent of us and have their own will and intention separate and apart from us, which is just gorgeous. And, after the story, right, this pulling this back together a little bit, the story, the coat and shoes are a man's coat and shoes, right? This is why he gets suspicious and upset. And after this, this illumination, literally, he comes back and realizes this coat and shoes, this coat and these shoes are my coat and shoes. Right? He's going to wear them. Now, this is an Indian sort of story, so it's like it's a household. He's the head of the household. Anything that comes out will be like brought out into the physical world by him. But if you take this as like inner feminine, inner masculine, the vision is received by inner feminine. She issues the orders, right? She basically issues the blueprint to inner masculine. And inner masculine, and we all, regardless of our gender, we have masculine and feminine within us. The masculine within you is the one who needs to like take the blueprint and run forward and actually build a structure. To manifest the vision, manifestation, right? So inner feminine is vision and nurturing, the 2 big jobs. There are other jobs too. And then inner masculine is boundary protection, right? So he is like, kind of setting his territory, like whose code is this, right? And manifestation.
Right?
So he's the one that goes out and accidentally sort of gets the whole story, comes back, and then now he will wear it. And this is the inner masculine within you.
Yeah.
And because it's uncoordinated and suppressed, it causes disruption. Right? So you could say, well, the more efficient thing would be for her to just say the story. But you don't know, right? You don't know why is she not respected because she's a woman, is, you know, blah, 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 all of those things. But the other aspect of the story that's lovely here is that even when there's suppression, the story gets out anyway.
Yeah.
Even when it causes disruption and discord, it all works out because the story has other agents that support it. So the flames are not like, this is outrageous, you know, let's protect, let's like retrieve. They don't care. Right? But in the course of just doing what flames do, right, the inner masculine gets it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not saying, oh, thank you, because there is a higher power controlling, the flames are looking after us, so we can all be helpless babies and the flames will take care of us. Right. That's not what it's saying at all, because the flames are trying to help. It's more, I think, a sort of demonstration of the robustness of story, right? And how you can try to keep it down, but it'll be hard. And when it comes out and breaks all kinds of stuff in your life, right? You think, oh my gosh, I messed up, right? I've messed up the delivery, and now everything is broken and it will never be better. And it's like, well, the system of like reality, nature, life, of the mythopoetic aspect of our world is just a little bit more robust than that. It's robust in the face of not your ineptitude, but in the sort of stumbling that happens from your wounding.
Right.
If she weren't wounded and suppressed and kept the story down, this whole world would not have existed at all. Of the story. Right. There's more to say there, but that's my start, and I'll hit the ball back.
Right. It's really interesting. Right at the beginning, what you said about how the story comes out not out of vengeance or any other reason, it just comes out because it comes out. And there is this thing that happened, and I think I shared with you about how the English translation of the story that I read had that one line in the story which really disturbed me for a couple of days, because it really steered me in a different direction, and I wasn't willing to go there. It said, when the flame was telling the story of what happened, it said, the woman doesn't even know, but the story and song got out of her, and they had their revenge. So they had their revenge. That was one line which completely threw me off track, but also I said, hang on a minute, that doesn't fit.
That doesn't feel right. That doesn't
it doesn't feel right. And because, you know, the entire story, it doesn't even take the pains of telling you why the woman suppressed it in the first place. The entire story does not have, it doesn't even say that the husband was wrong to be bitter and angry. It doesn't pass any judgments throughout the story. It's really like the whole story has this voice of no fear, threat, or control, no blaming, no judgment. It just says what happens without the why, without getting into the why. So at one level, it's almost like showing an archetypal map of how things go when it comes to a story's manifestation. And also it's holding
space. The feeling of revenge did not fit in that at all.
It just did not, that tone did not fit into the tone of the rest of the story.
Because revenge is more profane. It's fear, threat.
Yeah. So revenge is like, oh, it was the woman's fault. She should not have suppressed. So when you say it that way, then you know, the story and song are angry at her. They wanted to have revenge. No, the only time where the story attributes any intent to the story and song is when it says they wanted to escape and run away. And they were kind of thinking of how to do this.
Yeah.
So
and not even out of fear. They didn't leave the house. They were like, no, we belong in your lives.
Yeah.
Manifested, and here we are, shoes and coat. We're not leaving you. We're just like, we're coming out into our rightful place.
Yeah.
Like a lost board member. Hint, hint.
Exactly. So that, after initially being kind of thrown off the kind of course, I was thinking, what is the whole point of their escaping and just staying in the house? What were they doing? And the first insight that came to me was, they don't want revenge. They're not angry. They came out of her because that is their next step in their journey. And they need to keep moving. And what do? They take the form of coat and shoes because that is how a man steps out into the world. And once he wears the coat and shoes, they get access to go into the outside world. I can't hear you, Artie.
In a visible way. In a visible way.
In a visible way. Yeah, in a visible way.
Right. It's not like it's undershirt and underwear, right? It's like
it's
thing that defines him.
It's outer garments, and he kind of puts those on, and then that's how they get access to the outside world. So they want the man to carry them into the outer world, and they want to be the kind of armor, shield, protection, as well as the persona that he carries into the outer world, because the coat, as the outer garment, is also a part of persona that we wear. And
because it's uncoordinated, he's like,
he doesn't know.
He's like, this isn't my coat. Whose coat is this?
I mean, ideally, one way of this happening in a conscious way would have been for the woman to kind of probably knit him a coat and hand it to him, saying, this is a new coat for you. So that there would have been kind of a transition from the woman to the man, the feminine to the masculine.
I mean, there is a hint here about the issue of voice between them, because when she actually uses her voice and says, I don't know, he doesn't believe her.
He doesn't believe her. Yeah, so there is definitely disconnect.
Yeah.
Right? So both sides. So when, when they escape out of her, it's time for them to move on from the house and go into the outer world.
Hang on one second. So can you go back and talk about the aspect of revenge and how we didn't feel that was right?
Yeah.
But then that was from the English translation. And then you went back to the original Kannada translation.
Yes.
Can you talk about that, what you found there?
Yeah. So because it didn't, I mean, this insight came to me and said, no, this is not revenge. And then I became
I remember this so vividly, because before you told me this next part, when you told me on the phone, I was like, well, obviously that's not right. That can't be right.
Yeah.
That can't be right. Can we check the original? And you're like, actually, I already did. And I did. Like, oh, okay, good.
So I did. So I ordered the Kannada, collection of folk tales from that region, and this was a complete shot in the dark because I wasn't sure it was there in that book.
In that collection.
That collection.
And by the way, the collection showed up in the mail like the day before our call.
Yeah. So I just did the previous day. So basically, it was this book. So it's written in Kannada, but it says Folk Tales of North Karnataka. So I ordered it, hoping that I will find something. And when I looked up, there it was, a story and a song. That story in Kannada. And I read the whole thing. I started to believe, because the translation was really accurate, word to word. And I thought, oh, maybe this will have the same thing then. And I go to the end of the story. Everything is accurate except that one line. They had the revenge. That line wasn't there in the original.
What did it say instead?
It just said, the story and song came out of her while she was sleeping. She didn't even know what happened. That's all it says. And
I think that's extraordinary. So it's not in the original. The Indian, the British Indian sort of translator basically added that in.
Yeah.
And what's extraordinary is that the entire story was translated from Kannada to English completely accurately and perfectly, except for that one line
one line. Yeah.
Was probably injected in by him because of his lens or wounds or whatever.
Yes.
Right? He probably didn't even notice he injected it. And then when we read the story, we read the entire story and we're like, there's one line that doesn't feel right here.
Yeah.
And that was the line.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of, these archetypes are consistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like we're so special or whatever. It's like when you're fully in one archetype, or when you're fully, let's just take sacred and profane to keep it simple.
Yeah.
When you're fully in the sacred, if anything tastes of the profane, you can tell right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. Yeah. Keep going.
I could tangibly feel the tone of the story was very non-judgmental and sacred, because throughout the story consistently did not blame anyone, did not take sides, did not say this is right or this is wrong. And suddenly that one line just glares at you and says, oh, that was revenge because, she should not have suppressed it.
Right. I mean, this is like, when we've talked about the Tao Te Ching, right? And when I've kind of gone through the Chinese versions of the Tao Te Ching, one of the reasons it's so hard to translate for me is that of the 80-some chapters of the Tao Te Ching, like as you read, like in that talk on the Tao Te Ching, I did chapter 1, right? But once you have that feeling of chapter 1, which is like basically the only chapter you need, as you go through, it becomes very clear that the rest of the Tao Te Ching, as it's been preserved and handed down to us, is not from that same author as chapter 1. There's probably, I would guess, 12 to 15 of them that are completely in the same feeling of chapter 1. And the rest are, as these things happen, other authors write them, and it becomes a part of the composite kind of book, right?
Yeah.
And it's exactly that same feeling, but it's like, I'm not a scholar and I'm not going to dig back to look for evidence that probably doesn't exist anymore. You can just taste the difference.
Yeah. And
Sure.
even now, the social commentary that is made on these stories, and particularly this story, is they would say, oh, women are carrier of stories and culture in society, and look what happens when women suppress their stories. They're supposed to share it. They're not supposed to suppress it. And the message that later through all of this insight that I got was, you can't actually suppress it at all. I mean, she suppressed it, and what? It came out anyway.
All right.
And
so the lesson is you should listen to everything she says, even when she doesn't believe it and she thinks it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
You should take it, put it on, and wear it out of the house with pride.
Absolutely. I mean, there was momentary discord and, misunderstanding and all of that, but eventually it did work out. I mean, the guy figured it out and he said, okay, now I know what's happening. So it may not always be a smooth sailing. It may be a bumpy ride, but the story will eventually get out. So for me, that was, like I told you, very reassuring, because it's not, again, being the sacred, this whole story and song of your own bliss is sacred, which is why it will not put undue pressure on you to take this mantle on and do this in order to get it right. Right? It will eventually come
out. Coat is not this magical demon coat that attaches itself to the husband and he can't get it off.
Yeah.
It's just there, and he needs to figure it out with the fire of will Agni and the illumination of Agni and Agni and Agya, right?
Yeah.
Which I still think are related, but anyway.
I think so too. It's just, again, going too semantic over it.
Yeah. But he has to have this realization to come back and put it on, right?
Yeah.
And that's his job. Again, my bias in reading these is that the inner masculine is a part of you and the inner feminine is a part of you.
Yeah.
Right. So once you have that sort of lens on it, it's not who's, she should be allowed to bring it out too. And it's like, no. It's like if it's in outer gross society, absolutely. right? Because each
Yeah.
person, regardless of their gender, is their own kingdom. But when you think about it just as you, as a single kingdom with multiple sort of, there's an army, there's a priesthood, there's like a, a sort of medical care corps, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the brain thinks it and the hands do it.
Yeah.
Right. So the inner feminine brings down the insight, and the hands, the inner masculine, does it in the outer world. That's okay. You don't want to take the brain out of the skull and start writing on the blackboard with the physical brain. It's like, no. Keep it in. Let the hands do what the hands do. Let the brain, sort of dictate as the brain will dictate.
Yeah.
Just within one individual, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that that struck me is that, initially they had that misunderstanding and everything, but the man gets clarity when he sleeps in the temple. So the clarity that comes to him, the illumination that comes to him, is when he sleeps literally, like just takes his blanket and goes off to sleep. And that is the time you spend in sacred space. It's literally sacred space.
He literally goes into the sacred to get his illumination.
Yes.
Yeah.
So once he's in sacred space, as long as in the house he's all, ruffled up and he's angry and frustrated and all of that. But once he goes into sacred space, the flames come to where he is, and they talk, and he receives his insight.
Right.
And this is another thing that I was talking to my muse. I said, what do I need to do to find out what the story and song are? Because the story doesn't tell me. What is my story and what is my song? And she actually tells me, well, the masculine went into the sacred and found his insight. Maybe the feminine should go into the temple and spend some time there. That's really just that simple. The more you kind of go into the sacred, the more time you spend there, and maybe the woman, the feminine, will recover her story and song. She may be able to remember.
So that she can direct him in more detail.
Yeah.
This is a coat and shoes that you only wear in this situation.
Yeah.
I mean, like in a Western, Northern European Grimm fairy tales, it's like once she gets the full download, she can say, no. Like when you're going off and fighting, you wear the coat, it will protect you. Right?
Yeah.
Or when you go talk to the Maharaja, you wear the coat, he will like be convinced by you, whatever it is.
Yeah, this is a magic coat, and you wear it and basically snap 3 fingers, and this is what will happen, right?
Right.
Right now, she doesn't know what the code does or why is it even there. So that's
brilliant. It's sort of like there's this unanswered question where we don't know, where there are many unanswered questions in the story. But the key to answering the question is in the story, which is you go to the sacred and you sit there. And even in the sacred, the flames are not like, well, thank God you came here and didn't go to the bar around the corner.
Yeah.
Right? Let me now tell you what to do. The flames don't even know he's there. Or maybe they know and they're just pretending not to know. But the point is, in the sacred, there's no fear, threat, or control from the flames.
Right.
And that's how you receive
you idiot, why did you kind of doubt your wife?
Right.
You idiot, you should have known this is what it was. There's none of that. It just
that's what we're saying from our profane viewpoint from the outside.
Yeah.
And we're not wrong, but it's just,
So that is one thing, and the third thing that I found very interesting, especially when you shared your view of the flames as the storyteller. And I suddenly remembered that in the Indian theater tradition, just like in Greek plays, there is a chorus that starts off the story, narrates and gives an introduction, and then the characters come on stage and they start acting the play, right? So the structure of the Indian theater tradition is that at the beginning of the play, there is a narrator who comes on and introduces all the characters and gives a little bit of background to the story, and then he moves backstage and the story plays out. And the narrator keeps coming in in intervals and gives us commentary on what's going on, right? So, and he directly talks to the audience and he shares his views. sometimes subjective, sometimes objective views on this. So, and the narrator sometimes, and in the North Karnataka, the region from where the story is, there are plays that I have watched where the narrator is a lamp. A lamp starts the play. It literally is that. So this is a device which comes in the folk tradition quite often, that a lamp tells a story, right?
Interesting.
And here's another interesting thing, because just a little while ago I was thinking about so what is the story and song? And the thing that just came to me was the story and song are the golden thread. For people who've joined new or have not been here for the first few sessions, right at the beginning of the 25th March session, Artie read a poem by William Stafford, The Way It Is. And in that poem, the poet talks about the golden thread and the importance of holding on to it and never letting it go. And this golden thread, and we call it bliss sometimes, just keeps coming up in our discussions. So I immediately thought the story and song are the golden thread. And that's why they have their own flow. They have their own course. And, they don't really go wrong. You can't mess it up. They have their own intelligence, and they do things because, there is a structure and sort of a plan to it. And when I was thinking of that, and then remembered this tradition of folk play, right, when the narrator can be a lamp, the Sanskrit word for narrator, and this is the word that's used in the plays, is sutradhara. And sutradhara is literally the person who holds the thread. So it's literally the person who holds the thread. I mean, in the a theater, context, basically the person who holds the narrative. He's the one who kind of, holds the narrative together and presents it to the audience. But also, he's the one who kind of sometimes narrates the story.
Will you say the word again?
Sutradhara. Sutra, you have to be familiar because in Buddhism, the sutra keeps coming up. So sutra is a thread. And dhara is the one
which
who
is the root of our word suture, right?
Yeah, suture. Yeah, exactly. So sutradhara is the one who holds the thread. And in this case, again, in the story, the flame, the lamp, actually does the job of telling the story. And it is the one that holds the thread from start to finish. Like the man and the woman have all bits and pieces of what happened, but they don't actually understand it. But when the flame tells the story, the whole thread just becomes visible, and then exactly what happened start to finish. And in that sense, it's also, the thread of your bliss. The story and song come out of you because, they are your bliss.
Right.
And the question the story actually presents is that how do you bring your awareness of your bliss to your consciousness in the sense of being aware of it and knowing what it is versus letting it just play out without your conscious understanding of it.
Now, the temple he goes to, I was noticing, is that the Hanuman temple?
It is the Hanuman temple, yeah.
Okay. The only thought I wanted to share was Hanuman is a monkey god. He's the analog of the monkey king in Chinese culture.
Yeah.
And an analog for our monkey mind when we talk about monkey mind.
Yes.
So those of you who are taking or have taken the Bliss program, when we talk about monkey mind genius, it is this Hanuman. And just to make this note, right, it's the inner masculine who, through the anger, Manipura fire, goes into the sacred, sits, and it is the monkey mind genius who comes and ties all the threads together and gives him the full sort of picture.
Yeah.
So the monkey mind genius exercise is basically laid out in this little sort of folklore story as well.
Yeah.
There's one thing also I wanted to say about the symbolism of shoes and coat.
Mm-hmm.
At least in Northern European kind of folklore, a coat or a dress, right, is often seen as a symbol of embodiment. Embodiment.
Yeah.
So like the sort of spirit princess, you can't marry her until you retrieve her dress from the bottom of the ocean. This is from, probably like a Princess Vasilisa, Russian, Slavic kind of folktale tradition. And the symbolism there is that this spirit, inner feminine, needs to be brought down to earth and given embodiment.
Yeah.
Right. So for us, it's like it can't just be highfalutin ideas of bliss. We need to bring it down into embodiment and practice. Right.
Yes.
Karma yoga, right? Karma yoga specifically, which I think I was reading, Hanuman is like this avatar of karma yoga specifically.
Yeah.
Right? The yoga of action. And for us, of bliss. So literally, the coat is this symbol of embodiment made up of threads. It is this threaded garment, sutured, sewn garment that comes out of the inner feminine's mouth, right? And then is brought out into the world as the embodied, power, which is the inner masculine, right? The sort of manifestation, the sort of, we often say like, inner feminine is like CEO, inner masculine is like COO. I mean, they're basically equal, but her job is vision, his job is to go out and actually make the things like be built, implement, right? So it's like vision and execution. And shoes are protection for the feet. And in dreams, feet are typically symbols of two things. One is one's independence, power of independence. So being able to stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah.
And then secondly, the power of your capability of forward mobility.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And shoes protect those functions in you.
Mm-hmm.
So the power of embodied story, vision, bliss, to be independent and to move forward in the world. Literally on the back of the, it doesn't have to be this kind of, but I think of it on the back of the willing, loving pack horse, right, of the inner masculine to go out and like get all this stuff done. The other thing I like about this is that there's no origin story of where the story and song came from.
Yeah.
In the wife. It just is.
It just is, yeah.
Which speaks of its archetypal nature. Like any archetype, any core archetype, like, the number 3, right? The number 3 is not caused. It simply is, right? The value of pi, the value of the speed of light. These are not things that are caused. They simply are.
Yeah.
And so the story, it's not by accident. I don't think we've lost the message fragment of the prequel or whatever. That's like, the view of all the Logos, Cartesian people. There must be a logical reason. It's like, no, the point of the story is that this story is not caused. It is within you. From the Bliss program, we say 自然, the sort of pre-existing self of you that just blah is. That was another thought that I wanted to share on that.
Yeah, the story literally begins with the woman had a story in a song. It just that it doesn't say she got it from somewhere or this is how she came to stumble on it. None of that. It's almost like she was born with it.
Yeah. And so for me, it really sort of, so I accept the association of the story with the golden thread. I totally resonate with that. And then so for here, I want to draw this little distinction between symbol and allegory. So when you read an allegory, a story, and you take it as an allegory, there is a moral of the story. Yeah. Right. Which is this profane, fear, threat, and control, finger wagging kind of thing.
Mhm.
That bum, that lazy bum, he should have listened to his wife better. And
Mhm.
oh, woe is me, you know, like women being suppressed in society. This is awful, right? This is like didactics, right? I'm from didactics and pornography, the sort of improper art and everything. So improper art always ends up in an allegory. So wagging my finger, you should do this differently. You should regret this. You should fear this, and let me control you by telling you what to do next. That's allegory.
Yeah.
Symbol, like in the sacred, just is.
Yeah.
It's just showing you the physics of it. You do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
You can take the physics of story and use it for good things or bad things or nothing, to be productive or completely lazy. The symbol doesn't care. The symbol is just giving itself to you, right? Like an archetype, like the number 3 doesn't care, right? I could use the number 3 and give out 3 meals to people who are in need, or I could use the number 3 and fire 3 bullets to, like, you know, sort of hurt 3 good people, right? It's just the symbol itself. And so here, if we take the story as an allegory, we say all the things that we've been kind of saying a little bit. But if we take it as symbol, what do we derive from this on the nature of story? And sutra, golden thread, and the nature of stories that are pre-existing within us, that then are suppressed, and this comedy of errors happens, etc., etc. The first thing is the symbol versus allegory itself. That you'll take more nourishment, for me anyway, this is my bias, from a story if you take it as symbol and archetype, not allegory. Another way to sort of describe this difference is the difference between instruction and education, right?
Yeah.
The Latin roots of instruction are instruction. I can just even take the English roots. To put structure in, right? Instruct. To whip you into, like, there's a right way of doing it, and that's how we're going to do it, right? You have to do your homework, and you have to do it in the right way. I don't want this, like, creative thing that you're, like, coloring your math homework with crayon. We don't do that here. We have to do it the right way. Otherwise, we'll get whipped by the instructor.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas education comes from the word educare, right? And ducare, duce, right? It means to lead, right? And is out, right? So instruct, pounding structure into you, versus educare, which is to draw something out of you, right? To me, allegory pounds the moral of the story into you, whereas symbol educates you, right? Draws the truth that's already in you out of you. So if you take the story in this way, it will draw the story out of you. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing is this very reassuring thing where it's like, no matter how bad you mess up in taking the story as allegory, in reading things in your life as profane, not sacred, if you're the inner masculine and you don't hold space for the inner feminine, and you don't believe her when she says you don't know anything, and you're the inner feminine and you have this story choking within you and you still leave it there, like, screw it, I'm a woman in society, woe is me, I can't do anything, and you leave it there, it's still going to get out of you. It's still going to get out of you. But there's nothing you need to do. The story is just a diorama of, like, this is how the lungs work, this is how the liver works, this is how story works. And it's just beautiful because the story then, it's almost this feeling of, like, everything turns out okay in the end. But why is that? And the reason why, for me, is because story and archetype have intelligence, will, and force of intention on their own. On their own.
Yeah.
So literally the story and song, stage their jailbreak.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're in this, like, feminine, like, we always come down into the feminine because she's like the sensitive radar dish that is, like, willing to sort of accept us, right? And now we've landed, and this feminine is in yet another patriarchal society, right? So we can't get out. So we need to sort of sneak our way out somehow. But they have their own will and intention. If it were up to her, she wouldn't do it because she's, suppressed in the society.
Yeah.
But they get out anyway. And even though he misreads it, he gets himself to the sacred, thankfully. And then the flames, which are the bearer of the story, take care of the rest.
Yeah.
Right. And for us, we're like, oh, if I'm a husband, if I'm the wife, but we tend not to think of if I'm the story and song, if I'm the flame and the temple. And the truth is, we are the flame and the temple as well, and we are the shoes and the coat as well. We're not just the wife or the husband.
Yeah. And
this says a lot about, to me, the force of will and intention of a story or archetype, independent of what we normally think of as our own independent will as humans.
Yeah.
Right? A story, when it comes into your life, to use some vocabulary from healing, is a board member. You can interview the story itself to ask it for its insight, and it will tell you.
Yeah.
And this is how, in the beginning, the way I sort of introduced the session was, I want to talk a little bit about the power of story and manifestation.
Yeah.
Where a story will inject itself and impose its will, assert its will in your life, which implies intention, intelligence, and will separate and apart from you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the juice, the fruit of the symbol as I read this sort of overall story.
Yeah. Yeah. This has happened so many times. And after this entire episode, I was like, there were so many times I've remembered stories that I've read, and all I've done is just run a kind of commentary on the memory and say, oh, that was a good story. Maybe I should just read that novel back again. Without wondering why I remembered it out of the blue, at this moment in time. I dismissed it as just a memory, So this story kind of made me actually think about, story as a conveyor of insight, as a carrier of a message, saying, okay, I need your attention. I have something to tell you. Because again, one story can tell you different things at different times. When I read the novel, I would have taken a whole different symbol and meaning out of it. But when I remember it, say 5 years later, maybe it's coming to me to say something else. So that sense of how story just shows up, knocks on the door and says, I'm here, I need to say something to you, I think was the most interesting and important thing for me to take away from how this happened. Like the next time I remember something, I'm going to sit and pay attention to why I remember the story and what does it want to say.
It is hard to do. It takes practice.
It takes practice, yeah.
Because even our first impulse was like, this is a dumb story that there's no ending. What do you mean she doesn't know the story and song? Move on. How are the other projects going? And then it kept inserting itself into sort of the feeling.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like another thing that's coming to me is this idea of like every story is a flame.
Yeah.
Every story is a flame. Yeah. Right? That like heats your cooking pot to sort of bring forward your transformation. Yeah. In terms of pressure and containment. And so every story is a flame also in the sense of it is a combination of will, agni, and seeing, vision, intelligence, agya. Agya, right? So agni, solar plexus manipura, agya. Agya, the sixth chakra. And so vision, bliss. And so this idea of a story, so we know stories can give insight and illumination. That's wonderful. Hopefully we take it not as allegory only, but as a symbol and archetype. But there's also this sense of willpower, where the story has its own will. And to expand this idea a little bit, the story has its own will. The flame within you has its own will. Your bliss, fighting to get out of you, has its own will.
Yeah.
Archetype has its own will, and muse,
Mm-hmm.
the muse is her own kind of sutradhara,
Yeah.
like flame carrier, lamp, golden thread bearer.
Yeah.
And all of these things, the story that's in you for no reason,
Mm-hmm.
are of the level of will of, when we talk about the levels of will, need, want, and desire,
Mm-hmm.
are of the level of desire, because the story is just there in her in the beginning
Yeah.
for no good reason.
Yeah.
Right? It is pre-existing, it is categorical, it is not caused. And desire are the things you will toward for no good reason. No, I just like it. And if I don't do it, it won't hurt because I'm not doing it because I fear pain.
Yeah.
So if I don't do my desire, I'm not going to hurt. If I don't do my want, my prestige, my numbing, if I stop those, it will hurt like hell because my wound, I'm doing these to numb this wound.
Yeah.
But desire is the thing you do for no good reason. So if I don't do it, there's no wound that it's covering. So nothing hurts.
Yeah.
Not from my ego interest as an individual human animal. This thing is just beyond my identity, beyond my wounds, beyond pain and pleasure, even beyond my personal history somehow. And so the way the story can flex itself into your life is through story, folktale, fantasy, daydream, a dream that comes to you when you're asleep, a real life encounter where you're like, yeah, I was in the grocery store and this guy was all up in my face about this thing, or I watched this interaction between these two people and what the heck, those things can all be taken as flames that are talking amongst themselves, but you can take nourishment and insight and illumination from them if you tend to read it as symbol, not allegory. Right. That's when the whole world becomes accessible to you. If you read everything as allegory and you watch something on social media that one person is doing to another and you're like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. If it says allegory, you're like, well, that has nothing to do with me. I don't need to take any insight from that. I wasn't there. I don't live in Minneapolis. I'm never in trouble with the law. It has nothing to do with me. Right. But if you see it as symbol, you're like, this is a reflection of something going on within me. Right. There is obviously I'm thinking about the George Floyd sort of tragedy. Right. If you read that as a dream, there is a sort of out of control police officer in me. There's a black man within me. Right? There are officers that are standing by, not doing anything to intervene within me. Right? And then when I finally see the reality of what the hell is actually happening within me, if you were to read it as a dream, the entire world erupts. Right? And these rivers of human sort of moral compass saying, we're turning the ship no matter how hard it is to turn, we're doing this. Right, we're doing this. And so these archetypes can also come to us in flashes of insight, ideas in the shower. Muse coming to you, giving you orders and ideas. And then also, there is this function and role of memory. So people will say, there's this dream I had when I was a kid, and it hasn't even been recurring. It's this dream I had as a kid, and I wonder if this means anything. Or maybe it doesn't count anymore because it happened such a long time ago. And I'm like, well, tell me. And the person will tell me. And it's a little bit of sleight of hand that I do, that I ask them to tell me before I tell them why. Because I'm afraid maybe they won't tell me, or they'll change, they'll tell me, but they'll maybe edit the story, right? But basically, the way I treat memories of stories and memories of dreams is, again, that they count. So if you think of a dream you had as a kid,
Mm.
to the point where you tell it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to get to that point, but definitely up to the point that you tell it, or you tell yourself and you remember.
Yeah.
Amusing around it, right? That, to me, in my experience, doing all this work, that counts just as much as if you had that dream fresh just last night. In fact, you almost give it an extra weighting of importance, because in remembering the dream from your childhood, the dream basically recurred.
Yeah.
So you got the dream twice, which is even more weighty than if you just had the dream the first time ever last night.
Yeah.
Right? So when you remember dreams, when you remember stories, incidents, events that happened as a kid or in your past, when you remember movies that you loved, stories that you loved as a child, all these are preloaded, seeded archetypes ready to burst forward, story and song stuck within you that, I mean, ideally you like barf all of it out and you look and see what the pattern is, and you'll accelerate even faster, right? But nobody pulls you aside and tells you to do that. It's like, because I mean, the reason why society doesn't do that is because we are in a society where we're focused on instruction, not education. We haven't. So I don't want to lead anything out of you. Right? I'd send you all to trade school and like work in my like factories if I could get away with it. Right? Says the simplest or whatever. And so this idea of stories that you loved as a child. So as a parent, right, when you read like Goodnight Moon or The Three Little Pigs or The Little Prince to your kid, or Harry Potter, and as soon as you finish the story and say the end, they say again. And the first 2 or 3 times you fall for it and you read it, and the 5th time you're like, okay, it's just time to go to bed. And so when they say again, right, it's not just the profane says, well, they're just trying to like delay bedtime or whatever. But the sacred is like, why is it this story? Why is it not those other 6 stories on the shelf? Why is it this story? What is in this archetype that my child is like pulling nourishment and reflection and resonance with? Why is that? Right? And then also the other question of like, when you're an adult, and if you're lucky enough to have this relationship with a parent, you're like, well, I'm thinking about this. Your mom will say, well, when you were a kid, there was this story that you would just have daddy read to you 50 times a night if you could. And he read it 49, and the 50th, he just blew his top and left the room. And you're like, what story was that, Mom? And she'll tell you, and that will be a clue, a sort of glimmer of a golden thread for you as well.
Right.
Now, those of you who are listening are like, your life is probably flashing before your eyes, going like, oh my gosh, that's like a year of work digging through all these stories. And it's not. I mean, you can do that if you're really nerdy and into it, but you don't have to. You just sit quietly and let whatever story come to you. And if you want to save yourself a lot of work of like manually boiling the ocean and going through every story you've ever encountered, when the story does come to you, don't say, well, that doesn't count. That doesn't count. Right? That's what she's doing in the story. That's why it has to tumble out of her when she's not looking.
And I just remembered in the Greek tradition, isn't Mnemosyne the mother of all muses, the memory goddess.
The goddess of memory is the mother of the 9 muses.
Is literally the mother of all muses. So, when she brings something along, it's got to be like a powerful blend of all kinds of insight.
Absolutely. And in the Odyssey and the Iliad, in the Homeric hymns, in Hesiod, right, when you start a story, like telling, like at the beginning of the Homeric hymn to Hermes, right? At the beginning of the poem is always you invoke the muse. And one of the things you ask her to do is to help you remember the story and tell it again through me wherever you choose to start, starting wherever you would like.
Yeah.
So you're invoking the muse, this daughter of memory, right, to help you remember the story, to tell it again, typically at the end or the middle of a feast, as part and parcel of both the nourishment of the feast and the celebration and the memory of the feast, because typically you have a feast to commemorate something, which is why you tell these stories in the middle. What else? Anything else?
So that's, for me, like I said, the most important thing that came to me was the fact that, at the end, the woman does not remember what the story and song are. And the story just leaves it open-ended there, saying, the man asked and the woman had forgotten, was like an invitation for me to ask that question within myself and to explore it further, to find it out for myself. And I realized the reason the story is open-ended is because it wants to induce that curiosity within you.
It's making your story tumble out.
Yes, and to kind of prod you in that direction and say, okay, go find out for yourself, go explore it. So then, and the answer that came to me when I asked that question was, why don't you spend some time in the sacred if you want to know? So the entire story is kind of like a map laid out, and also a kind of miniature version of the sacred itself, like the sacred space. Everything, the way the story narrates the things, the way things happen, everything feels in the realm of the sacred. But also the message at the end, if it has a direct kind of do this kind of a message, it is that spend some time in the sacred and you will know. So that was what came to me.
Did you?
So that is my kind of assignment to myself, as to like, how much time can I spend in the sacred every day, and see what
you got the insight of the golden thread just this morning.
Just now.
Yeah. And so actually one thing I just want to throw out there, and then maybe we'll close and do the exercise, right? But is I don't know if people like this format of we do LSS, live sacred space, where we just take a story and just kind of run with it. I like this format. And so I just want to put the call out to everyone that if you've listened this far, right, in the replay or in the live session, and you like it, and you have a story within you, like a folk tale or something that it has really resonated for you, and you would like to kind of email that to me or Gary, send it to us for us to kind of read it and see if something strikes us, and maybe we'll chatter about it in one of these sessions. Let us know. We can't guarantee we're going to read every story, right? But let us know. We'll pick through it, and we'll use that as our kind of dream flow of like images that come to us as well. And the image that came to me was that, when we say, okay, the guy needs to go to the temple to sit in sacred space, well, this is sacred space. We are in sacred space right now. So okay. So if all of you coming in are coming in to sit in sacred space, I guess that would make Gary and myself the two flames that are like or hearing us. I don't know that you'll take particular insight from us, but maybe you'll get a laugh or two out of it.
Yeah.
So that's my thought. That's my invitation to everyone.
Yeah, it will be lovely, especially if it comes from specific, your cultures and traditions. It would be, greatly insightful, at least for me, to kind of know stories from different traditions. Artie, all traditions anyway. You would probably,
no.
Yeah, I know this.
Just to add this in, one of, I think I can say this, Gary, one of a golden thread for Gary herself is she is this kind of nerd Indiana Jones of like folklore and mythology. So she likes finding folklore and mythology myths children's tales from different parts of the world, even in India, right? She will come across a sort of a form of a story, and she'll post it to her Twitter or Insta or something, asking all her friends, all across India, like, okay, who has seen this story before? And they'll report in from different parts of India, and some parts they have it, and some parts they don't. And like, I don't think you're treating this as a hardcore scholarly academic thing, but you're like,
not really. It's just
a pattern of like where it is and where it isn't.
Yeah.
Also Europe, and then in Bali when we were there, you were looking for stories. So so yeah, if you have stories, send them to us, but also like tell us like where it came from, like like if you're in Norway, if you're in like Greece or whatever. And what's interesting is like if it is like a children's story, sometimes people will say, it's a story I heard from childhood and I kind of Googled it and here's a version, but my version is this. Right. Or you'll share a story and it's like, I Googled it and I couldn't find it anywhere. But here's the story my grandmother used to tell me. I still remember it word for word. And that would be, that would be exciting. I don't know. I think it's just fun. I think it would be lovely to receive stories from people. All right. Right. Do you want to share the exercise? Okay. Okay. So let me. I'll just go back into the background and Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. So fun. All right. So thank you, Gary. So all right. So that's it for the session. So I want to do a little exercise. I'll give you the exercise for the week, and then we'll close Sacred Space. So the exercise is pretty simple. Again, it's just this idea of the question is this. So having heard all the stuff about story and the will and intention of story and archetype, how they inject themselves into our lives, the question is just to sit quietly yourself 5-10 minutes. When you're in the car, just park it. And before you go into your next thing, set a timer, sit quietly for 5 minutes. And to ask yourself, what stories have come to me recently? And again, story can be an event in real life. It could be some happening that happened on the Netflix show you're binging that really has stayed with you even over the days and weeks. You keep thinking back to this like episode of the show and you don't even know why, right? And that you don't know why for no good reason, that's the clue that it's a really good, juicy flame of a story. Because if you knew why, then it will be at the level of want. If you don't know why, a story comes to you for no good reason, then that's desire, right? So if you don't know, who knows? It's just indigestion from last night's chili, right? Like, don't believe it for a second. If you really don't know the reason, then that's an interesting breadcrumb trail to follow. So what stories have come to you recently? When did they come up? What was the story? And what was the significance of the story to you? You can read it like a dream, right? If you're in live group advising, we can do it there, as a part of your healing. But then even in the past, as a younger person, as a child, think about when have stories hit you remarkably and made a difference in your life? And even movies, right? So when you first watched Star Wars, or you first watched, Footloose or Dirty Dancing, right? Whatever stories have really hit you remarkably in your life. It doesn't matter if it was popular and everybody was watching that movie anyway. That doesn't matter. What matters is that it hit you remarkably also, or despite the fact that it was popular. And what difference did it make in your life? And you can read that story even now as a waking dream for you now and take that kind of nourishment from it. And then the last kind of direction of inquiry would be to ask at this meta level, like, so what is the role of story in your life right now, right? Do you bring it in and take nourishment from it? I mean, it's not free. It does take work. It takes effort, right? You pay for it with effort and attention. So what is the role of story in your life these days? And what role would you potentially like for story to take on in your life going forward? So anyway, that was my idea for the exercise to try it. And again, this is a sacred space. So try this only if you want. Only if you want, right? There is no pressure. There is no fear, threat, or control for you to do this or anything else. It's just my random kind of wacky idea suggestion for you. Okay. All right. So that's it for the session. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we clearly enjoyed it. And now I will go ahead and close the session, close Sacred Space. So our next session is next Sunday. It's free. It's open to everyone. Please feel free to invite others, your friends and family, loved ones, people you care about. And then if you have questions, post them here or in the comments or in the chat, and we'll pull all the questions together and do a Q&A session probably in the next several weeks. Okay. You have the green call to action button in the panel here in Crowdcast, so you can sign up for next Sunday's session now. If you're on Facebook, in the text of the post of this live, there should be a link where you can sign up for next Sunday's session. Okay. All right. So with that, I'll close the session and say that I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.